Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, the podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, and game masters. With your questers, Josh and Dan, I am Dan.
I am Josh.
And on today's podcast, we will be discussing all things Scorpionical, because this adventure is called Blackout, and that was one of their bigger hits. Anyway, so if you have any questions for us, please drop us a line at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. Yes, that was a very deep hit 1980s heavy metal musical reference.
I would just like to clarify that Blackout is not the original name of this adventure. That is the rename that RedBrick did for it when they updated it and released it as a shard.
Absolutely.
For Classic/3rd edition. The original name of this adventure, as it appears in the Throal Adventures sourcebook, is actually Deep Trouble.
Right. But I couldn't find a song that had that name, so I'm just going to stop talking now. I make up words all the time. Anyway, this is the one of the few in the Throal Adventure sourcebook that I've actually run.
Well, there are only 3, so...
Yes.
This is the only one you have run?
This is the only one out of the 3 that I have actually run out of this. And I did run the 3rd edition Blackout versus Deep Trouble. I don't think there's any major difference between the two of them, really.
As far as I'm aware, it's just stat block differences between them.
Yeah. I didn't check on the horrors or anything else. This one actually, since we did the first Throal adventure, did not have a horror. This one does.
Yes.
And a significant horror at that.
In fact, this is the only one in this book. There are 3 adventures in this collection. This is the only one that has a horror involved in it, which, grand scheme of things, it's nice to have horrors involved in Earthdawn adventures, but this is also one that is focused more on the kingdom and the areas underneath it for the most part.
Yeah.
And so it deals a little bit more like politically and stuff rather than horrors and somewhat horror adjacent stuff like we saw more of in the Parlength Adventures collection.
Absolutely. So the credits for writing aren't listed by who wrote what, as far as we can tell, so we're not entirely sure which author wrote this one, but I do find that this is very nice to have the political intrigue as well. So my guess is it's somebody who's further along in the development of the game itself. So they actually got the houses... because this one starts with some Cloak-and-Dagger type recruitment. I had a lot of fun with this one because there's 4 stages to this Cloak-and-Dagger just getting you to the job, which is 1, a weird dwarf follows you. 2, who sends you to somebody else who sells potions. To 3, who sends you even further to a retired soldier of the arm of Throal, who sends you 4, who quizzes you unmercifully about yourselves to see what kind of noble and heroic people you are, adventurers. And then finally, number 4, sends you to an officer of the court. So this is your vetting process. And so if you really want to stretch this part out, I recommend it because this is a hilarious and kind of a Monty Python, Benny Hill type thing to really draw out the enlistment process where it gets the game master a lot of role-playing opportunities, and you can have a little bit of fun with this as well. Finally, when you are there, you can then agree to help for the amount of money that they suggest you help for. In the adventure, I kind of made it like 3,000 silver, half up front, blah, 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 whatever you want to do. But to Josh's point, this one really has some politics to it. And that was a little bit more difficult for me to convince everybody what was going on, because this is not just a simple hack and slash go get them.
Yeah, and the politics are not super political. It's not that the player characters themselves are necessarily going to be involved in politics as such. It's more that they are not the only ones that are involved in investigating what's going on.
Yeah.
But it is significant that the other groups that are involved, none of them kind of want to let the others know what they're up to. And so it's more politics in the sort of Cold War Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy kind of thing, in that your group has a mission and you kind of don't want the other people to know that you're doing it. And if they find out, that has potential political ramifications upstairs.
A treaty.
they need to navigate the potential political or consider the potential political consequences of what they do.
Yeah.
But what they are doing is not in itself necessarily political as far as the mission goes.
I was going to say, it's about as political as a Shadowrun. Just know that what you're going to do reflects on who hired you, and what they're going to do reflects on who hired them.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it.
To a certain extent there, it's not quite as backstabby double dealing as Shadowrun frequently can be.
True.
But there is a little bit of rival groups trying to accomplish the same goal and being at odds with each other rather than just helping each other out from the beginning.
Yeah. So I couldn't really think of a movie reference for this, but just for the political aspect, your group is against their group and things like that. I couldn't really think of one off the top of my head.
I can't think of a specific movie reference off the top of my head, but what comes to mind for me are those kind of action-adventure tales where you have multiple groups that are going after the same MacGuffin.
Oh, like The Mummy. Brendan Fraser.
Yeah, like The Mummy, or in Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? Where you've got Indiana Jones and his folks racing the Nazis.
Yes.
To discover the Ark. Like, it's that kind of idea in that you have rival groups.
Yeah. And just understand that somebody above your pay grade is essentially employing you to do this thing.
Yeah.
So overall arc of the entire adventure, below the city of Hustane, which by the way is in the map of Throal, which is really helpful to understand where that's located inside the kingdom itself. So below the city of Hustane are some earthquakes, and 2 exploratory teams have now vanished and or died. They don't know. You're the new team. You get to go be team number 3 to figure out what's going on. So after you get hired and your whole vetting process, which again should be hilarity ensuing, you get to go buy equipment. And now that we have the Grand Bazaar book, you really get to go kind of play up the Grand Bazaar and maybe possibly being followed. So again, political maneuverings going on. The rival house, politically speaking, is having you followed. There you are.
Right. To explain a little bit of what's going on here, the Baroness, the leader of the city of Hustane, Divuna Divinicus, is that there are other factions that would like to see her disgraced. 2 other factions, essentially, that are kind of working to see her disgraced, one of which is within her own house, and then one is another Throlic family or power of some sort. And the other groups are basically trying to find evidence or do something that will discredit her and potentially get her removed, whereas the player characters are sort of being hired to solve the problem without hopefully bringing any shame to her name, so to speak, that would cause political consequences for what's going on.
Fair. By the way, I did turn to the 3rd edition title in the Shard. Blackout was written by Andrew Ragland. So
it was. Okay.
Your off-air guess was absolutely correct. Again, you're better at this than most people are. So once you are hired for the job and you go get your equipment and maybe handle the questions about you being followed, if you run into the people following you, if not, great, throw them off the trail a little bit because you don't want to let people know what you're up to because they do suspect a horrors in the works. So you don't want to give this, let the cat out of the bag. So then you get to go research in the Great Library. Again, this is all taking place in Throal, so you really get to go do a lot in the Grand Bazaar and the kingdom itself and all the cities. You are therefore confronted by a supporter of a politician who may send a pair of dwarves to keep tabs on you. So again, this is intricate. Even before you ever get to combat, you really get to explore the city a whole lot, and maybe some thugs attack you before you get to reach Hustane because, you got to throw some combat in there a little bit. They're trying to also delay you, give the other teams a head start. So once you're through all of that, then you actually get to go descend through the half-completed city of Hustane in Throal and exploring the underground. I recommend the EDSG podcast, episode 192, for exploring underground areas. We went through all the pitfalls and travails of that and Don't forget your impaired movement modifiers, and don't forget your darkness rules and your range of light sources and your visibility tables. Just a hint, because I've run this one within the last 5 years. In fact, I started this one literally 5 years ago today from the time this is going to go live. So there you are.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Not a lot. It's more that they are sort of given this task. They are not given a lot of details about who else might be involved in like keeping tabs on them and whatnot. Just being forewarned that there might be. And then they go and are sort of preparing for the expedition and discovering that they are sort of being watched and followed.
Yeah.
Not that those folks that are watching or following them interfere with them in any way, just kind of keeping tabs on them.
Mm-hmm.
And then they get to hike quite a ways down into the depths of the underground tunnels and caves of Throal to try and figure out what's going on. I actually would like to sort of highlight at this point one of the things that you might want to consider if you are going to be running this adventure in a more present-day 4th edition game.
Absolutely.
This adventure was originally written back when Hustane was still under construction.
Oh, good point.
And as of the 4th edition GM's guide, it is mentioned that Hustane actually has been completed.
Oh, cool.
So that is something to keep in mind. There are a couple of other cities that were planned and sort of under construction. You could very easily just move everything from being Hustane to being one of those other cities. The other possibility is that you could have it be Hustane, but the potential consequences and trouble that would come about because there would be a civilian population in the city that is not present there in the original writing is something that could actually add an interesting wrinkle to what was going on.
I agree. No, and since we are here for the 4th edition version of Earth Dawn, by all means, update everything. Please do, Josh. That's what we're here for.
I'll put that right at the end of my currently very long list of stuff that I need to take care of.
No. I'm saying on the podcast, update as we go along.
Oh, gotcha.
Yes. Because that's what we ask for. Are there any 4th edition updates to the stat blocks? Are there any 4th edition updates to the timeline? And since you just pointed out, this is a 4th edition update to Hustane itself. That is appreciated, I'm sure, by the listeners more so than just me. Then, of course, you have... so you have been hired. You go under Hustane. You get your equipment. You are maybe attacked once. You do... you descend through the chasm. You therefore encounter all of your underground traps. Like I said, like we laid out in episode 192, there's pockets of explosive gas. There's creatures down there. And then eventually you come across one of the other teams. You come across 8 dwarf warriors working for Baroness Devuna of House Hustane. So this was the previous force that hasn't quite come back yet. They were thought lost or dead. And then you also come across another exploring party by the 3rd politician. The rival house has been deposed and they've got somebody else doing their thing. So this is where, again, all the politics kind of mesh. Now, 3 groups, your players are one of them, plus the 2 other groups, all kind of meet and intertwine and tangle, knock yourself out, go for it, figure out what's going on. And that's where things get politically complicated.
Potentially
Politically complicated. That's a lot of C's, L's, and P's in there. And you kind of go from there. However, that's for you to figure out. That's for your players to figure out. That's the fun part. The otherwise underground creatures you get to come across, once you handle all of the underground travails of traps in the chasm and slippery slopes and explosive gas and so forth and so on, you come across cave crickets, which I think is a nice use of them, and some stone crusher horror constructs, and of course the horror itself, Emr'r'ko.
Yes. The horror can be a little bit tough.
Yeah, he was tough.
He doesn't have anything particularly special as far as abilities go. He's got obviously some of the more annoying horror powers. He's got corrupt karma. He's got damage shift.
Yeah.
He's got Karma Tap and Thoughtworm, which does mean that he has the potential of having agents that work for it.
Mm-hmm.
He does have access to Fourth Circle Nethermancer and Elementalist spells, which give him even more things to deal with.
Yeah.
He's got multiple actions with attack and damage steps in the mid to upper teens, defense ratings around 20. He's basically like a big giant sort of armadillo-y kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where his armor is weaker on the underbelly than it is on the top.
Mm-hmm.
He's a little bit of a tough character.
Yeah, he's shaped
to
kind
deal
of like
with.
a crab.
Yeah, but at the same time, this adventure is recommended for characters of 6th and 7th Circle.
Yes.
So the numbers that they are going to be able to throw around and the powers that they have to bring to bear are going to make this probably a tough but not insurmountable fight. And I don't think that the other obstacles that they run into on the way down there will cause them a whole lot of trouble. Like the cave crickets and the stone crushers, they're difficult, but they are pretty manageable in terms of their stuff. Like they're purely physical threats. They don't have any real like magical special abilities or anything like that.
Yeah.
The tough thing about fighting Emr'r'ko is its darkness power.
Agreed.
As you get closer to it, your light sources become less and less effective. Mm-hmm. To the point where within 10 yards of the horror, your light sources are only 10% as effective.
Yeah.
Which can make it very difficult to fight. That's the big obstacle really to the combat against it, is that your visibility is going to be pretty limited and difficult when facing it, which is going to be especially tough for ranged characters and magicians and whatnot that are trying to engage it at a distance.
Agreed. I think the cave crickets and the stone crushers and things are just to get you used to combat in your new setting because of the darkness modifiers, the light visibility table, and your movements are hindered in the caves that you're actually in. So I think it's prep for the big, bad, nasty fight at the end against the horror.
I can see that, and that makes a certain amount of sense. The lighting difficulties are not as severe in those earlier combats.
Yeah.
But broadly speaking, even with the potential political ramifications, this is a relatively straightforward adventure.
Yeah, that's it. Go figure out what's causing the earthquakes, stop it, and get back up to the top and report to the politician.
Right, and there are a couple of other groups that you will potentially interact and deal with, and how everything goes with those is kind of where the consequences and follow-ups would potentially end up.
Yeah, and I sent, so the party that I had at the time, because you said 5th and 6th and 7th circle characters, I had 2 5th circle characters and a 6th circle character, so I only sent a party of 3. I can't say they struggled, but they had a hard time. So if they had a 4th, it would have been a little bit easier. So the bigger your party is to send against the horror, the better off you're going to do. But they also didn't necessarily make a whole lot of friends between the other 2 exploratory parties to bring them in as assistants either. So if you make friends of the other exploratory parties, either Lendelte's or Baroness Devuna's parties, if they grab an NPC from there to help out, if you want to, that actually might not be a bad idea in case the party is small. Because to Josh's point, that is a horror, and that is not to be taken lightly because he's got some particularly nasty stuff that he can throw at you. When all that is said and done, I do like the fact that this does give like 4 kind of if-then possibilities to help conclude the story. And the first one is, if any of Lendelte's explorers make it back, do this. Secondarily, if none of those explorers make it back, that's a whole different political ramification. Third, if the characters dealt peacefully with a certain party, that's a whole different thing as well. And if they attacked that other party, that's a whole other possibility. So it's one of those, how well did your characters handle the other 2 parties? Because that kind of does matter politically speaking. And I like that it lays out exactly what to do in all 4 of those instances. Yeah,
there is one other thing that we didn't mention here, and that is that even if the characters defeat the horror, which hopefully they do,
Yes.
the horror still enacts a sort of dying curse
Mm-hmm.
that plunges Hustane into a murky darkness that is a curse, and it suggests that a possible follow-up or campaign idea would be for the player characters to investigate that curse and see if they can figure out a way to deal with it. Because until it is, light sources in Hustane are only going to be half as effective as they otherwise would be. Which is something that would certainly change the mood and tenor of any kind of encounters or community that develops there once construction has been completed. And that can be even more unsettling if you're running it in a time where Hustane has actually been settled and is established as a city. That's something that would have quite a different set of consequences if people were in there experiencing it as the curse sort of goes into effect.
Yeah, because all of a sudden, if you guys, if they survive and come back up, all of a sudden the entire city of Hustane is lit by half, and that would completely throw off the entire populace of that city within Throal, just because this one thing happened. It affected everybody at the same time, not quite like a brownout or a power outage. But now all of a sudden, all your light sources will only work by half, because here's the motivation for the horror itself. This is not one of those slow burn horrors that's going to infiltrate here and play on the emotions here, maybe get one to affect another. This horror wants to absolutely collapse the city and gorge on the death, destruction, and dismemberment of all the people at one time. So it's doing the earthquakes to literally cause the cave-in and the entire city to collapse in upon itself. Just to know. That had to kind of figure that had to be said.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, even having it happen to a settled and established Hustane makes the stakes even higher.
Agreed.
Because there are innocent civilians that are going to potentially be caught in it, which is a much more drastic catastrophe than it collapsing before anybody's moved in would be.
Yeah. So I think the 4th edition update would be a nice tweak to actually include the full population of Hustane instead.
Yeah. There's a couple of different ways that you can play it, to be honest, and I don't think there's necessarily a wrong one. It just depends on what kind of tone and hazard level you perhaps want to set. If you're going to be doing that, you may want to maybe have the equipment getting section where the group as written is doing that in the Grand Bazaar, to have that happen in Hustane to sort of establish relationships or to meet some NPCs that are in the city, to establish a little bit more of a personal relationship to kind of up the stakes for what is potentially going on.
Yeah, I agree. Make it more personal to that city instead of just it's the next town, nameless town I gotta go save. Tie it in somehow that way.
High marks for this adventure. It's, in some ways relatively straightforward, but there is a little bit of complexity and variability in how the player character group deals with the other folks that they encounter.
Yeah.
On one hand, it's relatively straightforward, investigate and deal with a problem type mission that is complicated and given some variety because they could deal with the other folks in different ways, and that could have consequences for good or ill.
Agreed. And I think there's 3 very large sections that are dependent upon the ROLE playing of character, because the whole vetting process, first off, where you interviewed by this guy and questioned by this person over here, and then you meet the politician, that's all role playing. That's all for your softer skills.
That can also be sort of hand waved and run through as more of just kind of an establishing shot sort of thing rather than doing it. But yeah, it is a great place to potentially expand the opportunities for interactions and so forth if you've got a group that's kind of down with that.
Yeah, because, by 5th or 6th circle, they should know who their characters are, and this is a good place for them to stretch their role-playing legs, per se, and some ad-libbing legs to really get them a feel for that. The second one is really when they meet the Baroness Dufuna's other warriors down underneath the city to role play that, because again, that could come to a fight. They could, end up killing the entire party. Who knows? And then the third one is when they meet Lendelte's explorers. And so there's really three good aspects, three good sections to role play. Two, you kind of have to do. The first one, like I said, I found it hilarious and fun to do that, just to see if that aggravated my players, really endeared them, if they wanted to quit halfway through, this isn't worth it, so forth and so on. It's just, that's the fun part. So I like the setup on the, this one's following you, they send you here, they send you there, they send you there, kind of like a quick cut scene from a bad cartoon or a funny cartoon, take your pick. So I liked this one. It's the last one. This is the last one that I've actually run. I haven't run anything in a couple of years, but I'm still going to run the other Throal adventures. So my players can listen to this episode. Don't listen to the last one. Don't listen to the next one. So you said you've run this one as well. How long ago, and how did this one turn out?
I would have run it back in the 90s.
Oh, wow. Gotcha.
I would have run it back in the first edition days. I'm pretty sure that I ran it for my long-term group that I talked about a lot.
Fair. Any memories? Good, bad, indifferent?
It was certainly not one that stood out in terms of adventure stories that came about.
Fair.
It's not one that shows up in terms of, oh, hey, remember that time
this happened?
Yeah,
gotcha.
It's possible that I didn't actually run it. I don't know. I would need to potentially go back and check the campaign logs and see if it actually is something that showed up.
Well, that's fair, because the first one also takes place underground in Throal after the Grand Bazaar. So this one you have to go back to the Grand Bazaar as well. So you're just taking a different route underground. So just little twists and turns. If you've done the other one first or did this one first, they both kind of intertwine a little bit, A, underground, and B, in the Grand Bazaar. So I started getting them confused and I looked them over. So folks, if you have any questions for us, or if you've run this one and have some wonderful tales to tell from the table, please drop us a line at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, go check the batteries in your flashlight for your legend.
Good night, everybody.